The blue whale, the saltwater crocodile, the African bush elephant. Not all the largest things in nature are easy on the ears. Discover the one that is. The great stalacpipe organ, the world's largest musical instrument. Only at Luray Caverns. What will you discover?
What do you know about Dr. Dunch?
Based on the unbelievable true story.
I can't make sense of this.
Dr. Death.
Dunch has 2 deaths that we know of.
Starring Joshua Jackson with Christian Slater and Alec Baldwin.
I am going to fix you.
All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.
Step outside the norm. Rational Radio. The Rick Unger Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Unger Show on this Thursday edition. Billionaires. Now, there is a subject that seems to interest pretty much all Americans, and it is particularly interesting now as we see how well the upper earners in our society, those with the assets, those who are billionaires, well, just how well they have done during the pandemic when most of America really was not doing very well at all. Well, somebody who writes a great deal about billionaires and tries to understand our rather, odd relationship with them is Teddy Schleifer. Teddy is a reporter at Vox's Recode, where he does indeed spend his time writing about billionaires. Teddy, great to have you on the program.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
So let's begin by digging into how it is that during this difficult time of the pandemic, when so many Americans lost jobs, millions were struggling to find a way to keep a roof over their head, feed the kids. How is it that these billionaires added to their net worth as opposed to losing?
There's a simple answer to that, which may be unsatisfying to critics, which is that billionaires are much more likely to hold assets that appreciate, right? I mean, I know that's a very kind of wonky answer, but let's just take, someone like Jeff Bezos, for instance. Why is Jeff Bezos worth almost $200 billion? And the answer is that Jeff Bezos owns about 10% of Amazon, and Amazon stock has gone bonkers over the last year. And it's not just, Amazon stock or kind of the tech billionaires that I cover. Frankly, all assets are doing very well during the pandemic. So in a lot of ways, the reason why billionaires are sort of at their best moments at a time when the rest of the economy is cratering is another way to talk about a phenomenon that has caught a lot of people's attention, which is sort of this divorce between how the stock market is doing and how the real economy is doing. And one manifestation of that is that billionaires are doing great, even when, as you mentioned, lots of regular Americans are not.
Well, I think most people can take a step back and look at those who have made money in the tech world and understand it. Of course, Jeff Bezos would see an increase in his net worth simply because we all became far more dependent on Amazon, where he owns 10%, than we were prior to the pandemic. So that makes all the sense in the world. I do think people struggle to understand why those who have a lot of assets or money tied up in the stock market, even they saw advancements in their net worth because the market did well. Is the reason the market continued to do well during the pandemic the result of the market being a futures-based concept? In other words, if I'm investing today, I'm really looking at what I think the market is going to be like next year?
Sure. I mean, certainly there's a broader conversation about why any stock does well and, to what extent that reflects a company's true fundamentals. I mean, some people would point to the fact that, hey, there's really low interest rates from the Federal Reserve. That's going to make stocks go up. And then therefore that makes billionaires wealthier. But yes, I mean, with some companies, I think it is accurate that their power and their reliance on these companies led to their stocks going up. But as you point out, not always. And, yes, there are some companies, some industries have struggled. Obviously, the airline industry, the oil industry has done poorly over the last year. The parts of the travel economy that have been hit particularly hard. But obviously, these things are not divorced from the broader economy. Interest rates are very low. We just pumped in, trillions of dollars in federal stimulus measures. So these things play out in the stock market, and they play out in billionaires' net worth.
So, it's interesting. You can certainly understand why somebody who has been struggling through the pandemic would have somewhat of a dim view, if you will, of these people who made nothing but money as their lives were really put on hold. And yet it seems like we as Americans have a somewhat bizarre relationship to billionaires. On the one hand, and you cite a lot of research in your piece. And by the way, the piece is called "The Number of Billionaires Spiked by 30% During the Pandemic." You can find that over at Recode, www.vox.com/Recode. We have a strange relationship. On the one hand, we look at some of these people and we admire and we appreciate some of the really large donations they have made to try to make life better for their fellow Americans. At the same time, we seem to resent them, don't we?
That's exactly right. And I think it's important to remember this is a new phenomenon. For a long time, billionaires were seen as the embodiment of the American dream, right? That these people, especially the ones who are self-made, reflected, the principles of hard work and entrepreneurship and grit that, even if you're not a billionaire, you always thought maybe you'd be next, right? That was sort of a key part of the American spirit. And it's interesting, we did some polling actually recently here at Recode, just this last month that we published, about how do Americans feel about billionaires? Because on the one hand, that's exactly how we used to feel, right? But now we have this annoying kind of complicated relationship with these people where we don't really know if everything they've done is fair, and it looks differently, because of yawning income inequality and certainly because of the pandemic. And we find that a lot of Americans are very uneasy about their kind of new billionaire class. For instance, in our polling we asked, do you think it's fair that the wealthy got wealthier during the pandemic? And 72% of Americans say they think that it was unfair. Only 19% say they thought it was fair. We asked them, do you think billionaires are good role models for your family, for your kids? Only 23% said they felt they were good role models. So there definitely is this kind of antipathy toward the mega rich in a way that I think the mega rich themselves are still sort of trying to get their hands around. Right. And to some extent it makes sense, right? To some extent, as you mentioned, inequality just is increasing objectively. It is. And on the other hand, obviously a key part of this is that there have been a series of progressive politicians that have, trained their voters' eyes on the inequality issue, and frankly, at times on the billionaires themselves. People like Michael Bloomberg or Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg have become villains to some extent in Democratic politics, at least. So there's a political dimension here as well.
All right. So well, first, let me reset. We're talking with Teddy Schleifer, who is a reporter at Vox's Recode. And we are talking about our relationship to America's billionaires. Teddy, I know you do know, there is a mechanism to deal with some of these issues. Most Americans think it's unfair that these billionaires have so much more money than they have, but we do have a mechanism. It's called the progressive tax system that we have. And yet, whenever you talk about raising taxes, even on the wealthy, you see a lot of these same people who have a problem with billionaires having so much money. They don't want to see their taxes go up.
Right. Obviously, one solution to this problem, which has nothing to do with the stock market, making billionaires' pre-tax winnings greater, is to tax them at higher rates. And we've seen during the pandemic, more and more calls for higher taxes. To be sure, this was even happening before COVID, right? I mean, obviously, the Democratic Party has moved to the left on tax issues. And right now, as we're talking, the Biden administration is planning a corporate tax overhaul. So this isn't going away. Now, one of the interesting phenomenons here, though, is I think people don't totally appreciate how much taxes would need to go up to make a serious dent in their net worth. You mentioned philanthropy earlier. We were talking about some people are giving these huge gifts. But the thing about having lots of money is that it compounds very easily.
Right.
So if you take someone like Mackenzie Scott, the former wife of Jeff Bezos, who gave away $6 billion last year, which was believed to be or probably was the largest amount of money given to nonprofits in a single year by a living person ever, right? Big deal. Mackenzie Scott actually got wealthier in the last year, even though she was, setting a record for the most philanthropy ever done.
That's a big deal too.
Yeah. So I think that sort of just speaks to how the amount of money that needs to go out the door, whether it's through philanthropy or, as you're mentioning, through taxes, to make a serious dent in their net worth. It's a really, really high bar to clear if you do believe that these billionaires should be doing more for the average American, whether it's through taxes or philanthropy. And a lot of the tax proposals that are circulated are focused on things that really wouldn't affect billionaires, at least not now. Things like capital gains taxes. Lots of tech billionaires don't really sell their stock, precisely because they don't necessarily want their net worth to go down, or the estate tax obviously only comes into play when these people die. So there is, the reason why there's been more and more calls for a wealth tax proposal, as difficult as it would be to implement, and obviously it would be a whole host of other unintended consequences. Some people believe that's the only way to truly target these particular fortunes, which have gotten huge over the last 5 years especially.
So you have another piece that I had wanted to discuss. It's called Why We Can't Stop Talking About Billionaires, which I found very interesting. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to do it, so I'm going to have to ask you to come back so we can talk about that piece. Can you do that?
Sure thing.
Excellent. We have been talking with Teddy Schleifer. Teddy is a reporter at Vox's Recode, where he writes about billionaires in America. You can read him. Just go over to www.vox.com. Teddy, interesting piece. All of your pieces are interesting. We do have this weird fascination with billionaires. Appreciate you joining us today.
You bet.
We will continue with the Rick Unger Show right after this.
Get rational. Call 833-711-7425. 833-711-RICK.
You, at this very moment, are listening to an incredible radio station that supports the Rick Unger Show and real political conversations. That is something so rare in the American media today. We thank them for carrying this show and investing in rational radio. But not everybody can listen to the entire show, and not everyone can tune in every day. That is why we've launched the Rick Unger Show Premium Podcast. Don't miss a single day of the thoughtful, solutions-based conversations that we strive to have on this program. Go to rickungershow.com, click on Premium Podcast, and get a monthly subscription. You'll get full access to every show we produce, or you can sign up for a year of The Rick Unger Show and save over 30% off the monthly price. Go to rickungershow.com, click on Premium Podcast at the top of the page, and sign up today. That's rickungershow.com, Premium Podcast, and make sure you get your daily dose of rational radio.
I'm Dr. Andrew Jacobs. As a sports psychologist with 40 years of experience, I've worked with athletes, coaches, parents, and officials, assisting them at learning how to handle issues like sportsmanship, developing a positive, realistic attitude, and achieving their maximum performance. I want more people to know about the importance of having fun and that winning is about doing your best. That's why I created the Sportsmanship Foundation, a 501c3 educational organization dedicated to educating parents and athletes about the role of good sportsmanship. Our priority is to help bring the fun back into youth sports. If you're interested in learning more or making a donation, go to winnersunlimited.com and click on the link for the Sportsmanship Foundation on the front page. That's winnersunlimited.com, doing your best, having fun, and becoming a winner. The Sportsmanship Foundation at winnersunlimited.com.
Thanks for listening to the Rick Unger Show Daily Podcast. You can hear the rest of the show ad-free by going to rickungershow.com and clicking on Premium Podcast at the top of the page.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.
At Tillamook, our cheesemakers don't just make cheese, they speak cheese. Our ice cream scientists, they live to brainstorm new flavors.
I dub thee malted cookie almond fudge.
Even our customer service team, there's nothing they'd rather talk about than whatever you'd like to talk about.
Tillamook, this is Jazz speaking.
That's because at Tillamook, it's not so much a job as it is a way of life. This is Tillamook. Do right by every bite. Find out more at Tillamook.com.